good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to this Build Community Connection. It's a Q&A with some experts in authentication libraries. So here today, what can you expect from this session? You can meet members of the Microsoft Identity Authentication libraries. So we are three. We will introduce each other. And we are from the product team, and we will answer all the questions we can. And we will spend the whole session really answering your question. To engage with us, you are in Teams for Live, so you have a chat box. So you will just push questions and we will answer them. And you can also upvote questions. If they are important for you, we'll try to answer the questions which are the most important. So who are we? We have, I think we will introduce ourselves. Jenny, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Jenny Ferris.
You're not live.
Oh, thank you. Hi, I'm Jenny Ferris. I am a developer on the Microsoft Authentication libraries, specifically on MSAL.NET and Microsoft.Identity.Web. It's great to be here with you today.
Hi, my name is Bogdan.
You're not live. You're not live. You're live.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Bogdan Gavril. I'm a developer on MSAL.NET, working on various SDKs, mainly .NET.
Thank you, Bogdan. And I'm Jean-Marc Prieur, so I'm a program manager in the Authentication SDK, mainly of MSAL.NET, middleware libraries, and also Microsoft.Identity.Web. So back to the content, we will start answering the questions that you might have about anything MSAL, protocol. We can also, any question you have.
We have a one here about, does ASP.NET Core Framework provide everything out of the box to authenticate, for example, with Shibboleth, a SAML IDP, when deploying a Blazor web app to an on-prem Windows server?
So that's a good question to which I don't know how to answer that. So us in the Microsoft Identity Authentication Library, we are more comfortable with the Auth2 protocol. So we would have to get back to you, Lorenzo, on that. If you want to post your question maybe on Stack Overflow, that might be useful. I think if you go to the documentation of ASP.NET Core, you will see that they handle SAML, but we don't know exactly for this one. Do you want to? Do we have another good question? Oh, that's a legacy ASP.NET service, so the documentation would be. Yeah, ASP.NET does support SAML. I don't know the detail. It's more we are identity, but we are more modern identity, I would say, with Auth2. Do we have any API available in .NET for single sign-on configuration and user assignment programmatically for gallery apps and non-gallery apps? So APIs available for .NET. We have MSAL.NET, which we recommend you using, Microsoft Authentication library for .NET, and that will work for any application, gallery or not gallery. Is there
Someone asked plans for OAuth 2.1?
No. We won't have. We don't have plans to support OAuth. Oh, sorry, 2.1 or 1.1? 2.1.
2.1.
Oh yeah, I don't know. No idea about that. Is it recent?
Yes. Someone asked to differentiate ital, MSAL, and Identity.Web.
Okay, that's a good question. So, anybody wants to take this one? No? Shall I? So ital is a library. So they have in common to be 3 libraries. Ital is a library which targets the Azure AD v1 endpoint, which was not completely standard compliant. MSAL is the next generation of library, which targets the v2 endpoint, also named Microsoft Identity Platform endpoint, and which is standard compliant. It's OAuth2 OpenID Connect standard compliant. Microsoft.Identity.Web is a library which sits on top of ASP.NET Core and MSAL.NET, and which provides the glue when you want to build a web app or a web API. It will take for you all the difficult code that you would have to glue, to provide, to make the connection between what ASP.NET Core does in terms of signing in users in web apps or validating tokens in web APIs, and then if you want to call a downstream API, MSAL.NET. And even in just the case where you want to sign in users or validate token, it's helpful because it simplifies the developer experience. The next session we have at 12 or 12:30, we'll talk about Microsoft Identity.Web. We'll make the announcement.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. We have a question on Identity Server, and where does it sit with all of this?
So Identity Server is not a Microsoft product, so I cannot really speak about it. This is, if you want, a competitor to Azure AD that you install yourself. ASP.NET Core knows how to handle Identity Server.
Jean-Marc, there's a question on Pixie. Does MSAL.NET support Pixie?
And you don't want to answer this one, Bogdan?
Yeah, sure. MSAL.NET supports Pixie in the authorization flow. So that's when you pop up the browser and the browser gets a code and we exchange that code for a token. Recently, the ASP.NET Core folks want to use Pixie, this security enhancement, for server side as well. We haven't yet implemented that, but it is on our backlog.
We have a question about using username password, like you can with an on-prem service, and AAD and also AAD B2C both support the resource owner password credential grant, which is username password. It's not recommended. It's not secure, but we do support it. Usually, especially for B2C, it'll be used for one-time, just-in-time migration to move users from an on-prem database into the cloud, or you can use it for testing, things like that. But it's not good to handle user credentials directly.
Okay. Thank you, Jean. So I see a question. How do you authenticate with Blazor client side and Azure Function backend? So on this one, the ASP.NET Core has announced very recently so I'm supposing this is a Blazor WebAssembly. So they have announced some authentication which leverages MSAL.js, MSAL JavaScript. The fact of talking about Azure Functions, I will show you something. I will show you some documentation. So this is the I'm bringing on my screen, which I need to send live. Okay, so that's the documentation of the Microsoft Identity Platform. If you want to get there, this is Microsoft aka.ms identity platform. So if you go to this documentation, you have all our quick starts, tutorials, samples, etc. And what was I trying to show? I'm confused now.
I was looking at a Blazor sample, maybe? Was that it? I was looking at the chat.
Okay, I don't remember what I was trying to. Oh, MSAL.js maybe? No, I'm sorry. I was the documentation. Does anybody remember what I was trying to show? Oh, okay. Bon. Anyway, this is our documentation, and I wanted to show something. I don't remember. Well, you have samples. you have samples, and that's all our samples with per scenario. So single page application, web applications which are with a backend, the desktop application on mobile, the daemon which don't have a user, daemon application, headless, which are more like when you don't have a web browser, so they use some text screen and let users sign in somewhere else, and the web APIs. And that's for various platforms. So let's see. Adding this. It's really hard to see the questions. So API for .NET single sign-on. So we said msal.net.
There's a question about JavaScript. Can you maybe give an overview of our library, our support for JavaScript, and where things are going?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Do you want to do it, Jenny, or where are we going? Maybe I might do this one. So for JavaScript, in terms of support for the libraries, we have this page, authentication flows and app scenarios, that will show you there are nice tables showing what scenarios in terms of single page application, web app, desktop, the one I showed before, are supported by each platform and on which operating system. So in terms of JavaScript, we have two libraries. We have msal.js 1.0, which is which has been generally available for 1 year now, which uses the hybrid flow, and we just announced yesterday msal 2.0, which uses the auth code flow with Pixie. So that's related to the question that Bogdan had answered just before, which enables you to work, for example, in Safari browser, even if you have the ITP. Where this is going, this is the work which we've been doing here, and there will be some investment in Node as well.
We are getting quite a few questions about just the protocol in general, so I can share my screen and.
Okay.
So there's a few questions about separating authn and authz, so authentication and authorization. So OAuth 2.0 is about authorization, which is scoped access to a protected resource. And then the OpenID Connect is a identity layer that's built on top OAuth 2.0, and it's about authentication, so signing in the user. And there was also a question about the implicit flow and the auth code flow. So I'll go over that quickly in this diagram. So we start with the resource owner, which is the user, and there's a client. This could be like a web app or a mobile application. We have the authorization server, which could be Azure Active Directory or AAD B2C or another identity provider. And then we have our protected resource, which is there. And the protected resource is what we want to gain access to. It could be like the Microsoft Graph user API. So in the first leg, this is actually going to be OpenID Connect. It gives us a well-known endpoint, and all that does is show us the public keys for the authorization server. It tells us what the authorized endpoints are, what the token endpoint is. We go there first. Then the client will go to the authorization server to the authorized endpoint, and it's going to identify the scope OpenID, and the response type is ID token. Because there's 3 types of tokens. You get an access token, a refresh token, and an ID token. So for just signing in the user, we want to have an ID token because we want to know who is the user, who's the person signing in. And then the authorization server will present a sign-in dialog to the resource owner, to the user. And there they will give permission to the application and say the permission wants to sign in as the user and read their profile. So they have to consent. So once the user gives consent, the authorization server will then redirect back to the client with an auth code. So if I were to do the implicit grant flow, I would actually, for response type, I would say token, and I would be getting back the access token directly in the browser. And that's why the implicit flow is less secure, because I could intercept that callback from the authorization server to the client, and I would have the access token. So the more secure way to do it is with the auth code flow, which is what we're doing here, which is where we first go to the authorized endpoint, and we get back an authorization code from the authorization server. Then the client on the back channel, so in a secure channel, will exchange that auth code for the tokens, for an ID token, an access token, and I don't have a refresh token listed here, but you would get all three. And the ID token is for the client, so that's where the client can parse the ID token, look at the claims inside, maybe display a customized UI or login screen for the, or not a login screen, but a customized web page for the, based on the claims found in the ID token. And then because OIDC is just a protocol layer built on top of OAuth 2.0, we also get back the access token, which can be used to access the protected resource, such as Microsoft Graph User API or your own protected web API. So hopefully that explains the difference between the implicit grant flow, where we're getting the access token back directly from the authorization server in the front channel, and the authorization code flow, which is where we're getting a code back first and then redeeming that code for access, ID, and refresh tokens.
Thank you, Jenny. We have a question. So we have a question, which is, when should I use ital? When should I use MSAL? When should I use Microsoft.Identity.Web? So I guess we were not clear before. ital, if you have a new application, don't use ital. ital is on the deprecation path. If you have an existing application, bon, you can still use it. Of course, we are not going to remove it. But for a new application, really don't. And you will find, we will have a hard time anyway to find documentation about ital. MSAL is the solution of choice if you want to write a desktop application or a mobile application, or a daemon application, meaning an application acquiring token on behalf of itself. We had this question, and I will come back to it. So, whereas if you want to write a web app and a web API, we would really recommend first that you use ASP.NET Core if it's with .NET. Because well, ASP.NET itself is not really maintained any longer. ASP.NET Core is the future. And in that case, you want to use Microsoft.Identity.Web, which will make it easy for you to sign in users and call web APIs if you want, and protect your web API and call downstream API if you want. So that's the answer for this one. We had another question, which was about delegated permissions compared to application permissions and client credentials. So on this one, the delegated permissions are used when there is a user, when an application will access resources on behalf of the user. In that case, the user will have to consent. The user will say, okay, let's say, for example, my application wants to access my OneDrive. I will need at some point to consent for the application to access my OneDrive. Something that can happen is the administrator of your tenant, your Azure AD tenant, can pre-consent for all the users. That's named admin consent. Now, so that's for delegated permission. Now there are applications like daemon applications which don't have a user. That means that they access other applications on their own behalf. And those are this kind of application. You see that these ones have, oops, it's not present in the code. So here, many of the scenarios, most of the scenarios have a user. So most of the scenarios we mentioned have a user. This is the user here. And they have this class of application which don't have a user. They just call other application on their own behalf. Think of a web app that wants to store, for example, or use key vaults. Then in that case, that's named using a flow named client credentials, and they are considered as daemon applications, like, you know, daemon running on Linux or services on Windows. Okay, next question. Jenny, we will make the slide of the protocol explanation available. That would be, I think.
Yes, we can do that.
Yes, we can do that. So next question, Bogdan, what do we have?
There are quite a few questions about Blazor and Azure Functions.
Okay, yes. So, oh yeah, Azure Functions. Okay, we are back. My memory is back. I know what I wanted to show. Okay, so I am back. I will show you about Azure Functions. So part of and that's actually good. So part of these scenarios, you see the scenarios about things that call web APIs, the fact of protecting web APIs. So we have in the documentation these application scenarios under concept, and those are all the scenarios, and you will be interested in protected web API. And in this protected web API section, we explain how you register the application using the app registration or using PowerShell. How to configure the code using the recommendation is Microsoft.Identity.Web, or at least that will be the recommendation very soon. How to verify the approach, and there is a section which is about Azure Functions. And for example, when you call a web API, we have explained here how to do things with Azure Functions. So we recommend that you have a look at these scenario landing pages, and you will find good links on samples that do with Azure Functions. About Blazor itself, Blazor is a bit new. We have some requests on Microsoft.Identity.Web to support it. That's something which is going to come. I know that there are some workarounds. So if you go to the Microsoft.Identity.Web repository, you will see that there are, so it's the repository, github.com Azure AD Microsoft.Identity.Web. There are some questions about Blazor, and some users who have found ways of making work. That's not something we have invested currently ourselves.
So just reading here in the order of the most upvoted questions, where does Identity Server sit with all this?
Okay, so yeah, Identity Server, I mean, that's not produced by Microsoft. It's something that you can install yourself, and you would have something like what Azure AD does, but you would have to handle it yourself. Azure AD, when you use the Microsoft Identity Platform, what you really do is you delegate to Microsoft the signing of your users and the management of your users. But there is way more than that. And if you want to attend the session we'll have in 1 hour, you will learn about the Microsoft Identity Platform, and you will see that you immediately get access to a huge user base with Office 365 users, with also external identities like Facebook or Google. You will so immediately if you are in your company, bon, you have access to the identities which are in your tenant, but if you are an ISV, you immediately can have access to many kind of identities. Then we have the security, which is handled by Microsoft. So we have some advanced security things. We detect breaches. We do this kind of things. There is all kind of services that we had on top of that, and we will describe more about that in the next session. Basically, in these times where many work from home and many cannot go working on premise, think of Azure AD as it provides your directory in the cloud, which means that everybody from home, from anywhere, can access the enterprise resources, and in a secure way and in a scalable way with performance, etc.
Are there any plans for a PowerShell library for MSAL? Best I'm aware, there is a PowerShell module written by a Microsoft employee, and it's awesome, but it isn't official.
Yeah, and that's the answer we have today. Yeah. It's not official. We don't have plan. It works very well. It follows very well, by the way. It follows very well the changes in MSAL.
Yeah, and generally, I think it's a better user experience than trying to call, because from PowerShell, you can call in .NET assemblies. So you could call directly into MSAL, but this is a bit more complicated.
Okay, so this one is, it says published. Why we see it? I don't know. Is there out-of-the-box support for impersonation? Do you want to elaborate on a bit more about that? Impersonation. Let me see if I understand you. When you have an application, all what we are doing is about impersonation. When you have an application which runs on your PC and you sign in a user, you have a user signing, then you do some impersonation. You will have the application act on behalf of the user. I don't know if that's the answer you were expecting. By the way, I was not really good at promoting being visualized there.
There's also a question about about certification, OIDC certifications. Can you tell us more about the server certification, if it's certified, and client SDKs, are they certified?
So yes, so the service Azure AD indeed is certified. It's OpenID Connect certified, and actually the V2 endpoint I was mentioning, the Microsoft Identity platform is OpenID Connect certified. It is standard compliant. The libraries themselves, so they are capable of talking to Azure AD, and they use some things which are in addition to the standards. For example, the notion of tenant is something which is a bit specific to Microsoft. So on top of the standard, we have this notion of tenants because we offer multi-tenant, and the libraries use this notion. So I'm not saying that the libraries would enable you to target any OpenID Connect IDP, because we haven't tried. I mean, you can try, but I think I'm not completely convinced it would work, because the libraries bring the token cache, and the token cache requires a bit more than the standard. Bogdan, Jenny, you agree on that?
Yes.
They developed MSAL.NET, so.
I would also say that our libraries, MSALs, are only work with Azure Active Directory, B2C, and the on-premise version of Azure Active Directory, ADFS. We have work items to make them work with other identity providers, such as the Amazon one and the Google one, and so on. But that's quite a lot of work for us to do, and this hasn't been scheduled yet.
And the lower layer are OpenID Connect. I mean, we use the OpenID Connect protocol. It's just that on top of it, for the comfort functions that we use, like the token cache, we use a bit more. I see a good question. Are there any plans to bring MFA options other than SMS to Azure AD B2C? I think it's a good question for B2C. We will announce, we have announced yesterday, and we will re-announce in 1 hour, the external identities, which is the kind of merge, at least a beginning of a merge between Azure AD and B2C. And you know that in Azure AD, you can use this other kind of identity, like you mentioned the security keys. So that's something which is in Azure AD, and as we bring external identities to Azure AD, that will be available. As far as using having directly support for B2C, I advise that you go to the meet the team with B2C if it's an option for you. I think it's pretty late. It's pretty late. Is it? Oh, no, that's at the end of the European day. So, I mean, depending on you are on Earth, of course, that can be very late for you. For Europe, that will be in this evening, and for Redmond or the US, that will be in the morning. We can find this session. So, what else?
I'm thinking it may be time to wrap up. Would you like to say a few words of where people can find out more and where they can ask more questions?
Yes, absolutely. So for where you can find more, I would say if you go to ek.ms identity platform, that would be really the page where you will find all the documentation with our quick starts. So try the quick starts. there is something, I don't know if you are aware of that, but there is something awesome. If you try the quick start, you will go to the portal, the automatic mode, and the quick start will now generate code, which is already configured for you. So that's new. We haven't maybe advertised that very much. It's really awesome. Then you have all kind of conceptual documentation, and then resources, including resources of how to get help, this one. So how do you get help and support, which is one page showing all the way you can get questions. And then, of course, you have the samples, which will help you getting started. I showed the sample page just before. So thank you very much for being with us today. I think, yeah, we really enjoy having you today for this session. And bye-bye.